Have you ever wondered what a human life is worth? What if I told you that, in my case, it was worth 3 poker chips and a bottle of cheap mezcal? My name is Rosa Elvira Mendoza Ramirez. I'm 84 years old, and I live in a small apartment in Iztacalco, Mexico City. But I was born far from here, in a dusty little town called Tlaltenango, in Zacatecas. I grew up among cacti and dry fields, the daughter of a silent mother and a father who used to spend his nights drunk in the only bar in the village. I remember that day so clearly it still burns in my chest. I was 15 years old, had just gotten my period for the 3rd time, and my body had already started to draw the attention of men I didn't know. My mother had sewn me a blue dress with little embroidered flowers. I loved that dress, even though she told me not to wear it outside the house. But I wore it that Sunday. I wore it without knowing it would be the last time I'd ever feel like a girl. My father played poker behind the cantina with men who smelled of sweat and cigarettes. He drank until he forgot he had a family. That day, he lost everything: his money, his boots, even his dignity. But he didn't stop. He laughed, and when he had nothing left, he looked at the man across from him and said, "I have a daughter. She's young, healthy, and obedient. What do you say, 3 chips, and she's yours for the night?" The men laughed. The cards were shuffled again, and with that, I was sold. I didn't find out until hours later. He came home and told my mother, "Tell her to get ready. She's going with Zamudio." That name still haunts me. Octavio Zamudio. He was 38. He worked in construction and was known in town for disciplining his wives. I was just 15. I didn't understand it. First, I thought it was a joke. My mother cried silently while brushing my hair. "It's done," she said. "Just go, and don't talk back." I wanted to scream, to run, to disappear. But I didn't. That night, Zamudio took me on his motorcycle. He put a bottle of mezcal in my hand and said, "Don't cry. You're not the first. You won't be the last." And I never saw my parents again. That's how my story begins. I never told this to anyone. Not fully. I hinted, cried between lines, but always swallowed the truth. Until today. Because I think it's time for someone to listen, to understand, to remember. Not me, but the thousands of girls like me, sold as if they were property, silenced, forgotten. If you've read this far, write in the comments. I'm listening to you, Rosa. Like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share this story with someone who needs to know what silence sounds like. Some stories must be told so they are never repeated. The first night I spent in that house, I didn't cry, I thought. If I didn't cry, Maybe it wouldn't be real. Maybe it was just a punishment. A twisted game that would pass. But it didn't. Octavio Zamudio lived in a small room at the back of a warehouse. There was no window, just a single bulb that hung from the ceiling and flickered every time someone turned on a blender somewhere nearby. The mattress smelled of urine and dust. The door didn't have a lock from the inside. I remember sitting on the floor with my knees to my chest. The dress my mother had made me now torn at the shoulder. He had yanked it when I tried to cover myself. He laughed, called me child, told me I would learn, like all the others. He made me wash the sheets, clean the floor, cook him tortillas with beans. Even though I barely knew how to boil water, he hit me the first time I burned the pot. The second time, he locked me outside all night. But the third time, he grabbed me by the hair, dragged me to the mattress, and did what I now understand was rape. At 15, I didn't have a word for it. I just thought, this is what men do. This is what I was born for. No one came for me. No one looked for me. Not my mother. Not my neighbors. No one. Zamudio said my father had already been paid with more than mezcal. He'd been given a debt-free slate at the cantina. He's better off without a daughter, he told me, and I believed him. He used to go out every night. He drank, gambled, brought home other women. But I wasn't allowed to leave. I stayed in the room. With the smell of oil and concrete, I watched the days pass through a crack in the metal door. I started to talk to myself out loud so I wouldn't forget my own voice. That's when I started to die. Not physically, my body survived somehow, but my soul, my innocence, my belief in love, those things died in silence. Sometimes I dreamed that I had never been born, that my mother had left me in a basket by the river, and someone kind had found me. But then I'd wake up to the sound of Zamudio's boots on the concrete, and the dream would vanish. He never called me by my name. He called me it. Make coffee, it. Get down, it. You're lucky I didn't sell you again. And I believed I was lucky. It took me years to understand that what he did to me was not love, not marriage, not tradition. It was abuse. It was violence. It was slavery. But at 15, no one told me that. So I stayed, because where else could I go? There was no internet, no hotline, no women's center, no friendly neighbor to knock on. Just me, and a silence so loud it could tear skin. I'm telling you this now not for pity, but because I want you to understand how a soul dies, not with a gunshot or a scream, but with a whisper that says, this is just the way it is. If you've ever felt that whisper, that despair, write in the comments. I've felt that silence too. And if you haven't, may you never feel it. but listen to those who have, and never, ever let them go unheard again. I stayed with Zamudio for 11 years. That sentence alone feels like a wound 11 years of servitude, rape, beatings, silence, 11 years of disappearing a little more each morning. He moved us to different places, a shack on the outskirts of Fresnillo, then a storage room in Tepito, and finally, a back room behind a mechanic's garage in Nezahualcóyotl. No one ever asked questions. As long as he paid rent and I didn't scream, no one cared. He told people I was his wife, but I was never even a person to him. I learned to measure his mood by the way he opened the door. If he slammed it, I ran to the corner. If he whistled, I knew he was drunk. If he was quiet, that was the worst. Quiet meant rage. Quiet meant I'd bleed that night. I tried to escape once. I waited until he fell asleep with the bottle in his hand. I grabbed a bag of old clothes and ran barefoot down the street. A woman selling tamales saw me and asked if I was okay. I shook my head. Before I could speak, I heard the engine of his motorcycle. He caught me 2 blocks away, beat me in the middle of the street while people watched. No one helped, not even the woman with the tamales. After that, he kept me tied up for 3 days. I stopped trying. My hair thinned, my gums, bled. I developed ulcers. He blamed me for not keeping myself nice. He stopped bringing food. Sometimes I'd go to days with just tortillas and salt. But the worst part wasn't the hunger. It was the mirror. There was a broken piece of mirror hanging above the sink. I started to avoid it, because every time I looked, I saw someone I didn't recognize. A woman with hollow eyes, with lips that didn't smile, with arms like sticks, and a bruise under her left eye. That woman was not me, or maybe she was, and that's what broke me. One night, after he had passed out, I stood in front of the mirror and whispered, "Are you still in there?" I touched my own face. My skin felt foreign, and I cried for the first time in years. But it wasn't a cry of sadness. It was rage, pure, burning rage. Rage at him, at my parents, at myself, at God. That night, I made a vow. If I ever get out of here, I will never let anyone erase me again. It would take more years, but the spark had been lit, and even the deepest darkness cannot stop a spark that refuses to die. If you've ever looked in the mirror and not recognized yourself, if you've ever whispered to your reflection, hoping she'd answer, comment below. I'm still here, and hold that promise like fire in your hands, because one day you'll need it to burn down the silence. I was 26 when I realized I was pregnant. At first, I thought it was another infection. My body had long stopped being predictable. My cycles were erratic. my appetite came and went like a ghost, and my energy barely lasted past midday. But the nausea stayed, and the ache in my chest grew heavier. I found out the truth in the worst possible way. Zamudio came home drunk as usual and in the middle of one of his rages. He shoved me so hard I hit my back against the table. The pain shot through me like a blade, and I collapsed, screaming. That scream saved my life. A neighbor, an older woman named Maria Tomasa, came running for the first time. Someone stood between me and him. She pointed at his face and told him she was calling the police. He laughed, called them. She's mine. Got the papers to prove it. She didn't call, but she helped me get up. She wiped my mouth and took me to a clinic the next day. There, the nurse told me the news. You're 3 months along, 3 months. 3 months carrying life inside a body that only knew pain. I didn't know what to feel. Happiness, terror, shame. All I knew was that something inside me had to live. I couldn't let it die like everything else had. Zamudio reacted as I expected. He said it wasn't his, called me a whore, locked me inside for a week. Then he just ignored it as if ignoring it would make the child disappear. But it didn't. She grew inside me like a tiny protest, a heartbeat against silence, a rebellion in my womb. And one night, when the pain came so strong, I thought I'd die. I grabbed a towel, bit down, and gave birth in the bathroom alone. She didn't cry right away. I thought she was dead. But then, a soft whimper broke the silence. I held her against my chest and whispered, "You're the first thing I've ever loved." I named her Lucia because it means light, and she was that light in a house built from darkness. Raising her was both a miracle and a curse. I didn't want her to grow up in fear. I didn't want her to learn silence like a language. But how could I teach her freedom when I didn't know it myself? Zamudio ignored her for the first year. Then he started to hit her, too. I would throw myself between them, take the blows, hide her in closets, sing to her at night, even when my lips were cracked from dehydration. I told her stories about oceans, mountains, birds that flew far away. I told her that someday we'd see those places together. She smiled with the confidence only children have. But inside me, I feared the truth, that I'd never be able to give her the life she deserved, that I'd end up just like my mother, silent, watching, helpless. So I made another vow, even if it kills me. She will not grow up like I did. And that promise would become the reason I finally found the strength to run. Lucia was 5 when I finally ran. It was raining one of those heavy Mexico city rains that make the streets shine like mirrors. Zamudio had gone out the night before and hadn't come back. I didn't know if he was drunk, in jail, or dead. I didn't care. All I knew was this was my chance. I packed what I could in a small cloth bag, some baby clothes, a photograph of Lucia at 2 years old, and the only pair of shoes I had that weren't torn. Lucia was still asleep, her small hand curled around the hem of my skirt. I kissed her forehead and whispered, "We're leaving, me Emma. Today, we start over." We walked for nearly an hour under the rain until we reached the metro station. I had no money, but a woman with a blue umbrella saw me, soaked and shivering, holding my daughter's hand. She didn't ask questions. She handed me 2 tickets and said, "Take her somewhere safe." To this day, I remember her face. I never got her name. We rode the train until the end of the line. I had no plan, no place to go. I just knew I couldn't go back. Every stop felt like a heartbeat pounding in my chest. Lucia stared out the window, fascinated. She thought it was an adventure. She didn't know it was an escape from hell. We ended up at a shelter in Iztapalapa. The woman at the front desk looked me up and down and asked if I had any ID. I didn't. I had nothing, not even a last name I wanted to keep. She sighed. Then she handed me a form. "Fill this out. You can stay 3 nights. After that, we'll see." Those 3 nights turned into 3 months. They gave us food, blankets, and a mattress to share. Lucia made friends. I started to clean the floors, wash dishes, cook with the other women. For the first time in over a decade, I was surrounded by people who didn't look at me like I was property. Some of them had stories like mine, others worse. But we all shared one thing. We were trying to rebuild what others had torn apart. I cried every night for the first 2 weeks. Not because I missed him, but because I didn't know who I was without him. Zamudio had taken everything, my body, my name, my years. All I had left was Lucia and a deep desire to never be that broken again. A woman named Leonore, who volunteered at the shelter, noticed me. She was in her 60s, wore large earrings, and spoke softly. She took me under her wing. She taught me how to read again, how to write my name, how to fill out forms. She helped me get an ID, a job interview, and a sense of self. She told me, "They took yours from you. Don't let them take what's left." That phrase stayed with me. When I got my first paycheck cleaning an office building at night, I looked at Lucia asleep on our shared mattress and whispered, "We made it. We're free." Freedom didn't feel like fireworks. It felt like a warm tortilla in my hand, a pillow that wasn't stained with blood, a door that I could lock from the inside. But freedom is fragile, and healing isn't linear. There were still dark days, triggers, nightmares, but now I had something I never had before: choice. And with that, I began to rebuild my life not as someone's possession, but as a woman with a name, a voice, and a future. Freedom came with a price at the shelter. No one talked about how liberty is not the end of suffering, it's the beginning of a different kind, the kind that creeps in when you least expect it, the kind that wears the mask of guilt. For years, I had dreamed of escaping Zamudio. I imagined that once I left, everything would be better, brighter, lighter. But what no one tells you is that leaving abuse doesn't erase it. It follows you. It clings to your skin. It echoes in the sound of footsteps behind you, in the way a door slams, in the smell of cigarette smoke. Lucia started wetting the bed at night. She didn't speak much. Her teachers said she was withdrawn. I knew better. She was protecting herself the only way she knew how, at the shelter. She had been the light of the room, but when we moved into a one-room rental with cracked walls and a leaky sink, that light began to fade. I tried everything. I worked 2 jobs cleaning houses during the day and sweeping hair in a salon at night. I sang to her. I told her she was smart, strong, beautiful. But one night, when I came home late and found her asleep on the floor, curled into herself, I saw the shadow of my own childhood in her, and it broke me. I sat on the floor next to her, held her hand, and cried, "I promised you better. I don't know if I'm giving you that." She stirred in her sleep and murmured, "You're here, Mama. That's better." That one sentence kept me going for years, but life didn't get easier. I was denied jobs because I couldn't read fast enough. I was followed by men in the street. One landlord tried to force himself on me in exchange for rent. When I refused, he kicked us out. Again, we moved 7 times in 4 years. Lucia started asking questions. Where's my dad? Why don't I have grandparents? Why don't you let anyone touch you? And each question was a blade. I swallowed whole. I didn't want to lie, but I couldn't tell her the full truth, not yet. So I said, "Your father couldn't love us the way we deserve, but I do. I love you enough for 2. And she believed me, at least for a while. But children grow, and pain, when not named, grows too. Lucia became a teenager, quiet, observant, sometimes distant. I knew she didn't trust easily, and I feared that my silence had taught her that. I started writing letters I never sent, telling her everything about the poker chips, the bottle of mezcal, the room with no lock. I never gave them to her, but writing them helped me remember that my story wasn't over, that I was still alive, still healing, still trying. If you're walking through healing, and it feels harder than staying broken, comment below. I'm still trying, because survival is not a finish line. It's a daily act of courage. Like this video, share it, Someone out there needs to know they're not the only one putting the pieces back together. There's a particular kind of silence that doesn't come from peace but from fear. It crept into my life slowly, wrapping around my routine like an old scarf. I stopped answering questions. I avoided looking strangers in the eye. I nodded and smiled even when I wanted to scream. And inside that silence, I started to disappear again. Lucia was 17 when she asked me a question that shattered my carefully constructed stillness. "Mama, did someone hurt you?" I stood, frozen in the kitchen, holding a spoon over the pot of beans. My hand trembled. I didn't turn around. "Why do you ask that?" I said. "Because you flinch every time someone raises their voice. Because you sleep with a knife under your pillow. Because you don't let anyone love you." Her voice cracked. "I'm not a child anymore. I deserve to know." I put the spoon down, sat at the table, and for the first time, I told her a piece of the truth. Not everything, but enough. I told her that when I was her age, I was taken. That her grandfather sold me like cattle. That her father hurt me in ways I couldn't describe. That I ran. That I fought. That I survived. She didn't cry. She just held my hand. "I always knew you were stronger than anyone else," she whispered. In that moment, I realized the silence had done more damage than the violence ever had, because it had robbed me of my voice, and it had robbed her of answers. I started therapy soon after. It wasn't easy. The first time I tried to speak about the rape, I vomited. My therapist, a woman named Fernanda, didn't flinch. She waited, held space, gave me words I didn't know I needed. "You were violated. You were enslaved. But you were never weak." That sentence became my mantra. I repeated it every time the past crept in. When the nightmares came. When I couldn't breathe in crowds. When someone touched my shoulder too. Suddenly, Lucia came with me to some sessions. We healed together, bit by bit. She started asking about her roots, her history. I told her everything I could truthfully, carefully, with love, because now I knew silence protects nothing, and stories, when shared, become bridges, not chains. Lucia told me one day, "I want to work with women, help them find their voices, like you found yours." And I wept because I had feared for so long that my pain would be her prison, but instead it became her purpose. If you've ever broken the silence for someone you love or want to, comment below. My voice matters. Share this story. Subscribe. Your story might be the one that sets someone else free. Forgiveness is a word people throw around like candy. Forgive and forget, they say, as if forgetting was a choice, as if forgiveness was something you owed someone else. But no one ever taught me how to forgive myself. I lived with the weight of shame, like a second skin. I blamed myself for wearing that blue dress, for not running away sooner, for staying, for being silent, for letting Lucia grow up in fear. I thought maybe if I punished myself enough by working too much, by isolating, by not asking for help, I could atone. But pain doesn't vanish through punishment. It festers. One Sunday, when I was 62, I attended a church service near our apartment. I hadn't been inside a church in decades. Faith, for me, had been broken the day my father gambled me away. But Lucia insisted. She said the priest there spoke differently. So I went. I sat in the last pew, arms crossed, ready to walk out. But then, during the sermon, he said something I've never forgotten. Forgiveness is not about excusing what happened. It's about freeing yourself from who it forced you to become. I felt my throat close. That night, I wrote a letter to the girl I had been. Rosa, I wrote, I'm sorry no one came for you. I'm sorry you had to grow up in fear. I'm sorry I didn't protect you. But you did nothing wrong. You were a child, and you deserved love. I cried for hours, and in the morning, something was different. Not gone, but lighter. I started writing more, journaling, remembering the girl who used to sing to herself while sweeping the dirt floor. The girl who dreamed of oceans. The girl who once believed in love. She wasn't dead. She had just been hiding. I started dancing in my kitchen. I learned how to make mold from scratch. I painted my toenails pink. Small things, silly things, but they were mine. Lucia noticed. You're laughing more, Mama. Maybe I forgot how. I told her. And now I'm learning again. I began volunteering at a women's shelter. I shared my story with younger girls, some of them fresh out of their own nightmares. They looked at me with wide eyes and trembling hands. I held them and said, You are not alone, and you never were. And with each story I heard, each hand I held, I forgave myself a little more. Because I realized the abuse wasn't my fault. The silence wasn't my shame. The survival was my triumph. And no one could take that from me anymore. I spent most of my life apologizing for taking up space, for speaking too loud or not enough, for crying, for asking, for simply being. It was like breathing automatic, constant, suffocating. Sorry I made you angry. Sorry I didn't understand. Sorry I was born. But one afternoon, at the age of 74, I stood in front of a mirror in a second-hand blouse, my gray hair loose over my shoulders, and I looked myself in the eyes, and I said, no more. I was done apologizing for surviving, done minimizing my pain to make others comfortable, done shrinking so people wouldn't feel threatened by my truth. Because the truth is, I lived, I endured, I bled and healed. I raised a daughter who changed the world around her, and I did it all with a heart that still believes in kindness. I started saying no. No to invitations that made me anxious. No to relatives who asked, "Why don't you just let the past go?" No to anyone who mistook my silence for consent. And with every no, I felt stronger. I also started saying yes. Yes to dancing in public parks. Yes to new friendships. Yes to telling my full story, even the parts that make people uncomfortable. One day, a young woman at the shelter asked me how I found the courage. I told her, courage doesn't always look like fire. Sometimes it looks like sitting alone in a room and choosing not to hate yourself. She cried, I cried, and I realized that by living without apology, I was giving others permission to do the same. Lucia came to visit me last week. She's 39 now, works with survivors, has 2 children. She told them, "This is your abuela. She's the strongest person I know." I smiled, but inside, I was trembling, not with fear, but with awe. Because if you had told the 15-year-old girl in that blue dress that one day her granddaughter would call her strong, she wouldn't have believed you. But here I am, not healed entirely, not perfect, but whole and proud. If you've spent your life apologizing for simply existing, if you've ever felt like you had to make yourself small to survive, comment below. I deserve to take up space like this video. Share it with someone who still whispers instead of speaking out loud. Let them know their voice matters. I'm now 84 years old, and for the first time in my life, I live without fear. It didn't happen overnight. It didn't come with a ceremony or some grand revelation. It came slowly, like dawn breaking through a storm, quiet, persistent, almost imperceptible, until suddenly the darkness was gone. I no longer sleep with the knife under my pillow. I no longer flinch at loud noises or walk faster when a man steps too close behind me. I no longer feel the need to explain why I'm still healing, even at this age. Because I know now, healing is not a destination. It's a way of being. Lucia often calls me just to hear my voice. She tells me her daughter, little Alma, reminds her of me, stubborn, imaginative, always asking why. When I hold Alma in my arms, I feel the weight of generations lifting. She will grow up free because I fought, because I broke the cycle, because I decided, even after decades of silence, that I would not die with my story still buried inside me. I tell all my stories, not fairy tales, but real ones. I tell her about the rain in Mexico City, about the blue dress with embroidered flowers, about the woman who once thought she had no future and ended up with a family that sees her as their root. Sometimes People ask me if I regret not speaking out sooner, and I tell them every day I was silent, I was surviving. Every day I survived, I got closer to the day I would finally speak. And now I do, loudly, freely, without fear. If you're listening to this and wondering if it's too late for you, let me be clear, it is not. If you're still breathing, still aching, still searching, there is time. Time to heal, time to speak, time to live a life that is entirely yours. You are not too broken. You are not too late. You are not too far gone. You are becoming. So let this be your sign. Let my voice be the echo that shakes something loose in your soul. And if you've made it to the end of this story, my story, I want to thank you. You didn't just listen, you witnessed, and that changes everything. Comment below. I will no longer live in fear. Like this video, subscribe to this channel, share this story with someone who still carries their past like a burden. Because sometimes a single story whispered through pain can become the anthem of someone else's freedom. And remember, I am Rosa Elvira Mendoza Ramirez. I was sold, silenced, broken, but I rose, and I told the world I am still here, and so are you.